Imagine, waking up in the morning, you begin to reflect on the past day. You feel like your emotions are being manipulated by some invisible force, sometimes anger, sometimes anxiety, sometimes inexplicable emptiness. You know, there are things that could have been better, but you always feel trapped in an invisible labyrinth with heavy pace and confusion. Every day, you confront inner voices that do not allow you to relax and force you to do things that you do not fully agree with. You probably get used to. You tell yourself, it's okay, it's just temporary, I just have to work harder, and everything will be better. But the more you try to change something outside, the more you find things that seem more difficult to control. Have you ever wondered what you're fighting against? Is it external pressure, or is it the neglected heat in your heart? Have you ever wondered why, when you seem to control everything, everything is always controlling you? Whenever you try to take control of your emotions, to change the uncomfortable environment, you find that your efforts seem to be in vain. You seem to be standing in the center of a vortex, and your efforts are only to make yourself move faster in the vortex. And do you realize that behind it may not be external pressure or the unjustness of the environment, but the shadow in your heart, that you have never really known yourself, and that you are quietly controlling everything? You may wonder, that's impossible. I have enough control over myself. I know what I want. And it is precisely the part of your mind that is the biggest and most powerful, controlist, in your life. If you don't find this invisible handler, he will be holding your mind behind your back, your emotions, and even every decision you make. It's so powerful that every time you try to change, you get into a deeper predicament. You may not have noticed that all your hard struggles are trying to get rid of this invisible him. And he is your subconscious, and it's your shadow that you're ignoring. So, the question arises, are you ready to face the self you're least willing to face? The part deep inside you that you think is not important. Are you willing to put down your self-righteous control and truly understand and integrate this power, rather than continue to run away from it? Today, it's the question that we're going to explore in depth. Why is your human shadow always controlling your life, and you never really notice its existence? Let us look at the concept of the shadow of the personality at a deeper level. First of all, by the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, who believes that the human heart is not single and unified, but is full of multiple and complex orientations. And those parts of our personality that we ignore, repress, or refuse to acknowledge form the shadow of our personality. Simply put, these are the qualities that are deep in our hearts that we do not want to see. They may be negative emotions, unfulfilled desires, socially unacceptable impulses, or even some of the wounds that we have forgotten. Sometimes, we tell ourselves, I am not that person, I am not willing to acknowledge the mistakes that I have made. We do not want to face our darkest parts, but the fact is that those shadows do not disappear because you ignore them. On the contrary, they tend to become more stubborn and powerful as we try to suppress them. They affect the way we treat others, our emotional responses, and even the choices that affect our lives. In other words, the more you try to escape and suppress the shadows of your heart, the more they have a chance to play their part in your life. You think you have control over everything, but in fact, the real control over you is those parts that you haven't understood. It's the same thing as Nietzsche's mind. Nietzsche has put forward the theory of superhumans in his philosophy, which believes that the progress of humanity comes from the constant self-existing of individuals, often accompanied by the face and integration of the shadows. Nietzsche warns us that people must experience the deepest darkness of their hearts in order to reach the light that transcends them. And it is these shadows that make up what we call the most important part of self. You may have heard of the term light in darkness. Many times we aspire to success, happiness, peace, but we constantly lose ourselves in the pursuit of these goals. And, in fact, only if we really face the dark side of our hearts can we draw strength from it and become stronger ourselves. As we say, shadowing work is an important part of human individual growth. It is only by integrating the shadows that we can truly become a whole individual with true freedom. But the problem is that we are often unwilling to face them. Why? The shadows often represent pain, shame, uncertainty, and imperfection. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote, "The tragedy of humanity is not the pain of life, but the way we escape it." We keep avoiding it by covering up and suppressing it, without realizing that it is the catalyst of growth. When we refuse to face these shadows, we miss the opportunity to awaken our inner strength. We are always manipulated by some deep fear that if we reveal our weakness, we will not be able to withstand evaluation and criticism from others. But it is that fear that prevents us from truly living freely. But the question arises, why are we so afraid to face these shadows? Why do we prefer to run away, to control the outside world, and not to seek real answers deep inside us? The psychological mechanism behind this is the profound socio-cultural impact, the misperceptions, the perception, and the deep problems of self-identification. We want to change, we want to break through, but we feel trapped. We constantly pursue the successes, acceptances, perfection of the outside world, but we ignore an important fact. Our real predicament is not the pressures of the outside world, but the fact that we do not face and integrate what is hidden in our hearts. So, have you realized that the root of all this is probably our escape from our own shadow? When you start to look at it, you find that true freedom is precisely the understanding and integration of the deepest parts, while putting control over the outside world. Now, you may begin to realize that all of our struggles, pains, and confusion have hidden such deep psychological mechanisms behind them. You may also wonder what the consequences of all this are. Why is it that ordinary emotional fluctuations and patterns of behavior can affect our destinies unwittingly? We have been told that success is achieved through effort and self-discipline, that emotions can be controlled, and that behavior can be adjusted. Yet, behind these controls and adjustments, there is often a lack of insight into the deep shadow of your heart. You may feel that you are living at the same pace, yet, where you cannot see, the shadow is shaping your life. In a quiet but extremely powerful way, they influence how you interact with others, how you make decisions, and how you even look at your future. This influence is not limited to the emotional dimension, but is deeply rooted in our perception and behavior. Many people have developed self-restraint beliefs in their subconscious. I am not worthy of success, I am not worthy of happiness, or I am destined to fail. You may never realize how these beliefs are sneaking into every decision you make. When you face the challenges of work, life, or love, you consciously abandon the first attempts, even self-destructing, and, ultimately, these acts come from the shadows inside you. If you do not face these shadows, they will shape your destiny unwittingly. You may be trapped in a toxic relationship, knowing that you should not continue, but that you will never get away with it. You may consciously give up promotions on the job, and you may be able to avoid the challenge because of hidden unconfidence or fear of failure. These invisible consequences are so profound that you are beginning to be confused and even confused. Why have I paid so much that I still can't get the life I want? More seriously, these shadows are not just psychological problems of individuals. They have become part of the fabric of society, influencing the formation of culture as a whole. Our society teaches us the criteria of success: wealth, status, power. They are deeply rooted in our subconscious, forcing us to fight constantly in competition outside, ignoring our voices. However, this internal and external disharmony has led to widespread anxiety, depression, and mental illness. You may think that all of this affects individual psychological phenomena, or even feels that it has nothing to do with yourself. But, in fact, it is shaping the social fabric around you in a way that is subservient. Your environment is inextricably linked to your inner shadow. It is through the subconscious desirations and standards that society shapes individuals by influencing your way of life, behavior, and even interpersonal interaction. Every social change we experience, every emotional fluctuation, is embedded in the driving force of the collective shadow. In cognitive psychology, there is a concept called cognitive bias, which means that we are constantly influenced by psychological factors in the processing of information, leading to a derelict judgment. In modern societies, this perception is ubiquitous, especially when we are mired in control of the outside world, ignoring the perception of the shadow of your heart. Have you ever had the experience of knowing that something is bad for you, but you can't stop doing it? Did you say to yourself late in the night, "I want to change tomorrow," but it is always hard to put it into practice? That is the expression of cognitive bias, which is deeply embedded in your personality structure, all of which is the shadow of your failure to integrate. The mechanism behind the shadow is so powerful that it prevents you from jumping out of your own mind and from getting out of your own way of life. Your excessive control of the outside world is your deep, unconscious fear of yourself. Until you face these fears, all your efforts and struggles may simply be drawn away. You try to change life with external control, but every failure is merely to make you more certain that you can't, and eventually lead to a vicious circle. If you are now aware of the consequences of these invisibles, will you feel a deep fear? Do you begin to understand that the shadows in your heart are behind you, that they are the ones that govern your emotions, your behavior, and your destiny? These latent forces, like invisible ropes, are bound to you so that you are not truly free to live. They have infiltrated every corner of your life, and every failure of your life is the result of their deep manipulation. But the question arises, how, if you do not wake up, will these shadows quietly take control of your life? If you continue to escape, continue to suppress, how will they repeat it in your life? Perhaps the answer to this question will be found only when you truly face the shadow. When you begin to realize the profound implications of the shadows on your life, you find that the problem is not only in the outside environment, but also in how you live with yourself. You can no longer ignore these invisible forces, but that means that you have taken the first step of change. So, the question arises, how to break this cage? How to get out of this invisible shack? The real change is not external control, but internal transformation. To break the dilemma, the first thing to do is to let go of control over the outside world and to face and understand the depressed parts of your heart. This process may not be that easy, because it involves the challenge of reshaping your self-awareness, or even your belief in your past. But that is the starting point for your growth. How do you do that? To accept your shadow. To accept the shadow is not to make you submit to it, but to really face it and understand its meaning. You can no longer live with it in a way that avoids and inhibits it, but rather to recognize it and integrate it in a more profound way. Jung said, "What you resist will eventually become part of you." Those qualities you reject may be precisely what you need to accept and learn. For example, you may feel that you have excessive anger or jealousy inside you, but they are not part of you, and they are a shadow that you do not understand. When you truly accept them, their power will no longer be a threat to you, but rather a part of your self-development. Change your narratives. The narrative is what we give to ourselves. What are your stories of the past? Are you a passive victim, or a fighter who constantly challenges himself in life? Each of us has a life narrative of our own, which often determines how we look at ourselves and the world. To break the bonds, you need to re-examine your own stories and transform its framework. For example, you may have thought that your failures and frustrations were due to outside pressure, or that others did not give you a chance. But now you can start asking yourself, have I been avoiding something? Are I always letting these invisible shadows influence my emotions and behavior? Changing your narratives not to pretend that everything is good, but that you learn to look at your past and present from a different perspective. Nietzsche once said, "If you have not experienced depression, you cannot understand what goes beyond." This reminds us that every painful experience is part of our growth. When you redefine these pains, they are no longer your burden, but your weapon. You've been trying to control everything, learning to be responsive. You've been trying to control everything, but you've been trying to control the outside world, not to give you real inner peace. You've always wanted to change people, change your environment, change your destiny, but these external changes don't really make you feel content. Instead, they make you feel even more tired, anxious, and uneasy. The true relief comes from putting down control. It means that you don't give up your efforts, but that you don't rely on the outside world to define your happiness. You start to realize that true freedom comes from inner peace, which you can only get when you stop fighting with the outside world and drop your attachment to results. 4. Behavioral transformation, awakening in action. The ultimate point of change is action. When you adjust your inner narratives, accept your own shadows and put down control of the outside world, you will find that many of the problems that once seemed impossible in life are beginning to be solved. The core of the problem is not outside, and how you live with yourself, and how you deal with your inner contradictions. An effective way is to begin to let yourself practice these changes in everyday life. For example, when you are angry or anxious, not to react immediately, but to stop and ask yourself, what mood do I feel? Why do I feel like this? Drawing on people who have been lively in history, many people who have faced great difficulties in history have finally gained true freedom through an inner awakening. Nietzsche, for example, has experienced long periods of physical illness and mental suffering, but it is in these extreme circumstances that he has developed the concept of superhuman to teach us how to go beyond ourselves and beyond limits. And Jung, for example, has explored the subconscious of humans, introduced the shadow theory, helping us to understand the deep strength of our hearts, and eventually to integrate and grow ourselves. These people's experiences tell us that change is never an external struggle, but rather a spiritual awakening. It is a process of constant self-awareness, constant face and integration. When you face the darkest part of yourself, you will find that you are no longer the one who is trapped in destiny, but one who truly takes control of your life. This is the starting point for you to wake up from your predicament. By accepting your shadow, changing your self-narratives, putting down control and acting, you will be able to break the shackles and gain true freedom. It is time to begin this process, to meet the stronger self. You may have begun to understand that the constraints of life are not from the outside, but from the shadows and the unaccepted parts of our hearts. The more you run away from them, the more they manipulate your every move where you do not realize it. But when you look at the shadows and start to adjust your perception and actions from the depths of your heart, you will find that the problems that have troubled you are no longer insurmountable obstacles, but catalysts for your growth. Now, let me give you an ultimate insight. Your true freedom comes not from your ability to change the outside world, but from your ability to live in peace with the shadow of your heart. Only when you put down your excessive control over the external environment and truly begin to embrace the imperfect parts of your heart, will you find that the world is not the enemy you think it is, and that it is not so unjust and cruel. The pain, failure, and frustration you have experienced are the necessary ways to grow up. As Nietzsche said, "Anyone who kills me will make me stronger." This seems simple, but it profoundly changes your perception of life. You once felt that you were fighting the outside world, trying to change everything, but you ignored the fact that you had no control over all the external factors, especially those variables and challenges that you could not foresee. And, no matter how much changes in the outside world really affect your life, it is always how you face and respond to these changes, a response that comes from your mind in your mind. Imagine how long you haven't really looked at the shadows inside you. How long you haven't stopped and looked at the emotions and impulses you did not want to face. You see, the problem is never the outside world, but the relationship between you and yourself. If you continue to confront the shadows and avoid them, you will continue to face the same difficulties and challenges in your life. And if you begin to embrace yourself, you begin to understand the repressed emotions and desires, which will no longer dominate your actions, but will be a source of your strength. As Jung said, your shadow will only cause you pain until you learn to accept it. So, true freedom, not to reject them, but to reconcile with them. They are not a burden that you cannot escape, but an opportunity for you to grow up. You no longer need to seek answers from the outside world, but to find the most true self in your heart. You are no longer the one who has no power over your emotions and behavior, but who has control over your inner world and truly has freedom. You will no longer live under the expectations of others and the pressure of society, but rather live the truest and most powerful of yourself, according to your own rhythm and manner. This is not a simple process, but rather a gradual, deepening process. But once you have embarked on this journey, you will never be the past yourself. You will find that the problems that beset you in the past are only the threshold for deeper awakening. Imagine how easy and comfortable you can be when you no longer rely on outside control and live for others' evaluation. You no longer feel anxious because of the uncertainty of the outside world, but learn to respond to your inner voice and walk at your own pace. You no longer pursue to prove yourself, but instead learn to enjoy every moment of reconciliation with yourself. And all of this starts with you looking at the shadows in your heart, starting with the parts that you rejected. And when you do that, you find that life is no longer an endless struggle, but a profound and powerful journey. And you will be the Superman in your own life. You see, change always comes from your perception and acceptance of yourself. And when you truly understand the truth, you will find that you have the power to change your destiny, but you never wake up.